So what's the economics behind the EMH? The starting point is that the market price, P, is the outcome of supply and demand, right? The equilibrium price, right? If you remember the economics 101, right? The supply curve and demand curve, remember how it is shaped. And then the price, well, market clears at the place where the supply and demand curve meets, the intersection, right? And there the equilibrium price and quantity are determined, right? Then the question becomes like, is that supply and demand curve that you learned in the economics 101 hold again in securities market, especially under the EMH assumption? Okay, and for this purpose, for this part, you have to go back to the understanding of the supply and demand curve of the perfect competition situation. As a price taker, how does it happen, right? Now, we'll see that the EMH can be thought of as a hypothesis about the relative shape and position of supply and demand curves. Supply-demand framework is a clear way to think about the difference between behavioral and non-behavioral finance. Are they X-shaped or cross-shaped or plus-shaped? Okay? So, let's go. Supply, right? Supply curve traces the quantity supplied to the market as a function of the security's current price. So price has to be your vertical axis, y-axis, and then the quantity has to be your x-axis, right? Now, how many shares of Amazon are supplied today? As of today, let's say 500 million shares are outstanding. Shares outstanding is the one. Supply is set by firms on primary market, right? The IPO or seasoned equity offering, if it is like a 유상증자 or like increasing your number of shares outstanding. But yeah, of course, you might think that the supply curve, isn't it upward sloping as you is it this way or this way? Yeah, in your right picture, isn't it this way? You may wonder, right? The answer is no. No. The supply curve and demand curve that I'm talking about is aggregate supply and aggregate demand of one single security. Okay? Or potential demand and supply for one single security called Amazon.com, and in the short run, not long run. Okay? What if prices go up or down tomorrow? Okay? Well, it doesn't matter. Supply is fixed in the short run. Will the CEO increase the number of shares outstanding or decrease the shares outstanding immediately simply because he or she wants to? The answer is no. Because all those shareholders, right, millions of shareholders, will have to approve that, oh yeah, you can increase the number of shares outstanding or decrease the number of shares outstanding. Otherwise, it's fixed. Remember, just persuading one person is already a big challenge. And imagine that you have to, convince those millions of shareholders, right? They won't say yes, right? So it's going to be fixed and vertical line will be there, okay? 500 million number of shares outstanding. Now, demand. Day-to-day price movements usually reflect fluctuations in aggregate demand, right? Aggregate demand of that security. The aggregate demand curve traces out the quantity demanded by investors in total as a function of price P. It aggregates each investor's own demand. So, first of all, you may start with, your own demand curve, right? My personal demand curve for Amazon.com. Well, if the other things being equal, if Amazon.com's share price is high, then I cannot afford that much. So my quantity demand will be small in high price range. Whereas if price is much lower, so that I can afford, then I will increase my quantity demanded, right? So it'll be more like a downward sloping for myself, right, personally. And you and me, everybody. So everybody has that downward sloping curve, and institutional investors may be having the same downward sloping in this way, right? In this, right, fashion, right? Would that be the total demand curve, right? Well, the aggregate demand curve is a horizontal sum of all investors' personal demand curves. Well, downward sloping, everything added together, wouldn't it be downward sloping? Maybe your question. And then, given that the fixed amount of quantity of supply and this downward sloping curve, and then there will be an intersection, and then wouldn't that be the equilibrium price and quantity? You may question like this. But hold on. I'm not saying this is the end. Okay. Here you see supply curve, and this is quantity, and then number of shares outstanding. This is it. And price on your vertical axis, and then this is the true value, or let's say the invisible true value, or fundamental value, P star or V, that dotted line. So that price times quantity, number of shares outstanding, this rectangle will be what? Market value of equity, MVE, right? 시가총액. But the supply curve, I just drew downward sloping like this, right? Higher price, lower demand, lower price, higher demand. Okay? But is it the demand curve that we are talking about in EMH, efficient market hypothesis, in rational setting? If everybody is rational, right? If everybody is rational, would this be the demand curve, correct demand curve? The thing is, it's not. It's not. The thing is what? If the price is high, like Amazon.com's stock price, let's say $5 higher than its true value, how many of you will demand it? Well, nobody will want to buy it, right? A lot less, at least, a lot less will be demanded. And if the price is $5 lower than the current, the true value, how many of you will demand? A lot more, not just a little more, but a lot more. The demand will shoot up like crazy. How about $1? And then everybody is, rational. Then what happened? Well, this demand curve gets, flatter and flatter. Ultimately, the demand curve will be horizontal. Flat demand curve. Flat. This is the demand curve that we are talking about in efficient market hypothesis. The economics, if you remember the perfect competition, the demand curve that you face will be like this, right? Now, supply is fixed and demand is like that, flat. Why? Again, this is the situation where everybody is rational and they know the true value of it. And then if the price deviates just a cent from this, a cent or $1 above it, then the equilibrium demand amount, okay, or the demand amount will disappear instantaneously, disappear to zero. On the other hand, if the price deviates downward by $1 or a cent, then what happens? Everybody, or rational guys, will just buy, right? So that's why it is going to be a flat like this, right? Well, some of you may question the Korean students who used to buy and sell stocks on home trading system like 키움증권 or something. Each time you buy and sell stocks, you see this kind of quote window, right? And you may question, isn't this the demand curve and supply curve that we see every minute? Kind of yes, but I say no. For pedagogical purpose and then the theoretical EMH setting, right? We are talking about laboratory or this very theoretical the theoretical framework. So the demand curve is flat like this. This one, okay, what you see is not actually this kind of theoretical demand curve and supply curve. What do you see over here? For foreign students, right? I'm going to explain this window briefly. You see, right? When Korean students buy and sell stocks in Kium stocks or whatever stocks, you see first of all the stock name. And then the code, right? The stock code for this stock, SK Hynix. And then you see a lot of other information unnecessary, right? At least you can see that the price decreased by about 1.67% today. And then here you see red box over here. Okay, what is that? That is a transaction price that took place just a second ago. 1 second or millisecond. Every second there is an equilibrium hit, and then they transact with each other, right? Supply and demand meets somehow and then gets transacted. But what do you see on the vertical axis? These are the price level, quote level, let's say. Quote, we have seller's quote and buyer's quote, right? That's bid ask, right? This is bid price, and then those are ask price. These are the buyers, those are the sellers. Sellers ask, right? If you want to buy it, buy it at this price. Of course, you want to sell it high, sell it for higher price. So transaction price is over here, but they want to sell it at higher price, right? Each price level, there you see limit sell order amount. So for 118,000 Korean won, you see 220,574 shares. Those are put as a limit sell order. These don't include market order. Okay, 시장가 주문 no way. Okay, you cannot see it. What you can see is a limit order. Okay, 지정가 주문, right? So they are waiting all day long, right, until this price is fulfilled or something. Higher price range, you see more sell or the ask amount coming up. Limit ask, limit sell orders like this, right? Does this incremental amount increase as you increase the price? Okay, the answer is no. As you see, the incremental amount is the biggest at the lowest level, and then it shrinks down. Okay, it comes and goes, but it's generally shrinking down. Of course, you may argue that if you aggregate cumulatively, starting from this, add this to the next, and add it to the next, and add the next to the third, and things like that, then you will see an increasing cumulative limit order that is put to sell, right? That could be understood as a kind of a the supply curve, right? Supply curve, but that is going to be what we call a microstructure level supply curve. What we talk about over there is not a microstructure level instantaneous one, but in aggregate level, including all those potential market orders, and then potential sellers that are not shown over here, right? And then all those potential shares, the supply amount is fixed, maximum at the number of shares outstanding, vertical. That's the theoretical underpinning, right? This one is microstructure one, minute by minute. If you are focused on that small setting of the micro level transaction, this is it. But in daily level or monthly level, right, this is it. And then if you look at these numbers, these are the quotes for the bid, which is buy orders, right? And then you see at 501 lower level, you see a huge amount of demand, right? 377,584 number of shares are being bid, right? Somebody wants to buy it. And then this bid amount, well, comes and goes, but generally it shrinks down as the price moves down. Don't they have to want to buy even more if the price goes down, right? Isn't it strange, right? Isn't it? If you insist on downward sloping curve, at least these are not showing it. And you may argue that you may insist that if you aggregate all these things, right, cumulatively aggregated at the cumulatively 축차적으로, like cumulatively aggregate all these things, then these may show like a downward sloping. But again, these are something in microstructure over the second level in a very little market like that, very short interval, and then it's not incorporating the market order as well as the potential orders, right? So I have to warn you, these are not the demand and supply curve that we want to talk about in the theoretical argument. Some of you who are really trading, you have been trading a lot over this, right? You may be familiar with this idea. Well, if you look at the aggregate limit order amount in sell or ask side, which is aggregate amount 700,000 over here, and then if you look at the aggregate limit buy orders, right? How many shares? 1.5 million shares. Well, what can you infer from that, right? Just superficially, what you see is that aggregate demand amount is bigger than aggregate supply amount. If you insist that these are the true demand and supply curve, right? Then what you see is demand is more than two times bigger than the supply. But wait, I'm not saying that is true. Okay? Wait. Demand is bigger than supply, then what should happen? Well, price, wouldn't it increase because of the demand is higher? But, here's an important but, okay, my but. It says, you typically what the investors find in this kind of situation, the price is more likely to go down. Why? Because there is a reason in the first place. There is a reason why these guys are waiting over here. These guys are lurking underneath and say, oh, the price seems to be going down in the first from now on. So that's why if it should go down, I will wait over here. Oh, where is it? Yeah, I will wait over here. 501 a little more, lower, and I'm going to buy all those things, right? Because they are, they have some prior information that the market, the price seems to be going down. They are positioning themselves at lower price level like that, a lot more than the weighting amount above as a selling amount, right? So that's why if you have this kind of situation, what people typically find is that the price goes down temporarily. Okay. So this is another reason why I say this is not a true demand curve and supply curve that we talk about in the theoretical underpinning like this, okay? There is a reason why they're waiting over there. Yeah. But here is like without reason, okay? This is true value and then the supply and meets over there. This is market cap. This should happen every time. Okay, so that's that. Don't get confused. All that I'm saying is that this microstructure level information is not the demand curve or supply curve that we talk about. Now, fine. Then we could move down to the the real underpinnings, right? Okay. So EMH, right? Hypothesis that AD curve, demand curve, intersects the supply curve at a specific point over there, and then it should not change. And then demand curve, it is really, demand curve, is it really flat like that? Okay, is it really flat? There are three scenarios that enable you to have this kind of flat demand curve for a security. Okay, instead of downward sloping. I should draw it this way in your picture, right? In your video, right? Instead of downward sloping, in EMH setting, it has to be a flat demand curve. Why? And then it's especially in complete information market, right? And everybody knows every other stocks, every stocks there, and then information is given, then the demand has to be flat like that. Well, why is that? Three different cases, okay? Number one, if all the investors in the market are rational, right? Rational, then everybody will robot, right? And then they will, make the demand curve flat. We're going to come back to this one. Number two scenarios, when all the investors are, part of the investors are rational, the other part of the investors are irrational, but these irrational investors are split half and half, so that the half of them are optimists and half of them are pessimists. And their, the tension balances each other out. Okay, so that the rational guy will be determining the price. That is when the price, the demand curve gets flat. Number 3 is you don't need this kind of rational investors like that. There may be in the market, there may be some rational investors and then some irrational investors, right? That can drive the price away from fundamentals in positive manner or negative manner. But the third, the most important one over here is arbitrager. The arbitragers, omnipotent arbitrager that can cancel out all those biases so that it will make the demand curve flat back again. So let's go one by one over here. Or if all investors are rational, what happens? Well, if you're cold-blooded like a robot and then no other emotion gets into you, okay? Would you ever purchase Amazon stock if it is worth a single dollar more than its true value? And the answer is no. And by everybody being rational, right? I'm saying that everybody is just like everybody else. The smartest, like everybody is smart as everybody else. And then they got the same information, public information or whatever. Okay? They are acting based on all those common information and the analysis tool and the DCF method, what they can infer from it, identical. They will be identical. So that if you look at if you remember I, Robot, the movie, like the same information, every robot faces the same information, like parallel wise, and shoot together, right, like that. You can imagine this kind of situation, a representative agent kind of things, right? Representative investors tells everything. Every investors move the same way as just like the other representative the investor. Okay. Now, in that setting, if the price deviates downward from the fundamental value, what would you do? Would you ever, how much would you demand? Well, everybody will say, wow, $1 lower than the true value, I buy, right? So that the demand increases to infinity, even if the price deviated by just $1 lower. Infinity, $1. It's like flat over there. And then $1 up, zero, instantaneously. So it's like flat back again. Okay, so that's the first scenario. Everybody's rational. Second scenario, a part of the investors are rational like that, but the other part may be the investors who are biased, and these biased investors are half of them are optimistic and half of them are pessimistic, and they have the same buying pressure and same selling pressure, so that this buying pressure and selling pressure, they balance each other out. Optimist and pessimist, they are in tight tension like that. And then the rational investors that I talked about before, they are the ones who strike the balance so that the demand curve will be always flat. Okay, so that's that. And then the third scenario is arbitrageurs, right? Omnipotent, like Avengers, kind of, right? Iron Man taking care of the whole earth, right? Oh my God. Is that possible? But let's assume it in theoretical exercise, okay? So the rational investors may or may not be there. Almost the other parts are filled up with the irrational investors, right? And then there's a small number of arbitrageurs who takes care of the world. The biased investors, right? Positively biased, optimist and pessimist, right? They may not balance each other out. Sometimes the bubble may take place. Too much optimists going up. But then the price may deviate upward, right? But if the price deviates like that, what can you do as an arbitrager? Well, sell high, which means the price is higher than the true value. So they will sell it, but they don't have a stock. But how would they sell it? Short sell it by borrowing from somebody and selling it. Okay, how many shares? Infinite number of shares they could do it. So this is our assumption. Omnipotent short sellers, omnipotent arbitrageurs. Okay, so that they will hammer down the price to the equilibrium level back again, so the demand curve will be flat. And then what if the price goes below by a little bit? Okay, then they will push up the price like this by buying and taking an infinite long position like that. So arbitrageurs is needed in the third scenario. Why do I say all these three different scenarios? Especially the third scenario, it will be very important when we talk about or study the short sellers, right? We're going to go through the whole case studies about short squeeze. But before that, we need to understand the arbitrageurs and short sellers and the demand curve like this. So this will be a very important point. I'm going to ask you in the exam setting. So wait for that. Now, how could one think that the arbitrages are so aggressive? Yeah. These are the self-evident that I already told you. Now, where things stood, until late 1970s or 80s, right? It seemed like the efficient market hypothesis together with this competitive market, right? The neoclassical economics framework seemed to be triumphant in explaining the whole things so beautifully with mathematics, right? As if everybody is rational and then, or at least the arbitrageurs will take care of the whole world, right? And then they accumulated those evidence by then. But as time went by into the 90s and the 2000s, right, 21st century, things got unfold so that we realized that, seems like these theories are incomplete. And then maybe the market may not be that efficient, right? Those scenarios that we talk about, the three, right? Is that possible? To have all these kind of three scenarios, any of these three scenarios, is it possible to have any one of them? Turns out not. So we're going to go through the evidence against efficient market hypothesis in the next video. So wait for that. Thank you for watching. Bye.